In The Giver, the main character Jonas has led an orderly, disciplined life. A, quote, life where nothing was ever unexpected, or inconvenient, or unusual. The life without color, pain, or past. That all changes when he receives memories of the past and discovers the value of choice, along with the depth of emotion that's possible to human beings. But what is the connection between choice or agency and emotions, and how does understanding it help you? Where do emotions come from? When we're young, feelings seem inevitable and inexplicable. But as we mature, we start to learn to understand the causes of our feelings, starting with the immediate sparking event or thought. And if we do a lot of introspection, we may be able to get down to the root. But to describe the process instead from the root up, we can say that emotions are automatic, natural reactions to things that seem to affect your values. In contrast, there are things that you don't care about because they don't affect your values. To take a simple example, I don't value sports. So the outcome of a football game doesn't evoke any emotion whatsoever in me. But if you are a player on a football team, or a lifelong fan of a particular team, and you love the sport, then if your team loses, you'll be upset, and vice versa. The fact that we have positive reactions to things that support our values and negative reactions to things that undermine them is an automatic mechanism. The parts that we get to choose are the values themselves and what we do with our emotions. As philosopher Ayn Rand put it, quote, man's emotional mechanism is like an electronic computer which his mind has to program, and the programming consists of the values his mind chooses. We choose values for a reason too, whether the process of choosing values is thoughtful and explicit or passively accepted. To stick with the football example, you could value football because you appreciate the athleticism and camaraderie involved. Or you could watch football because that's just what your family does. Values are things we act to gain or keep, but we act to gain or keep things because we think they'll benefit us, because they serve a certain purpose in our lives. But when you don't have a choice, suppose, for example, that your dad takes you to football games as a kid and you don't have a say over whether you go or not. That's not a value. You may come to appreciate certain elements of the experience, but you didn't make a choice. You didn't act to gain or keep that experience. In The Giver, everyone except the ruling elite is in the position of the child at the football game. Everything is assigned to citizens there. Their houses, their jobs, their spouses, their children, their food, their clothing, their age of retirement. The only real choice they have is, as children, where to spend their mandated volunteer hours. So they choose no concrete values, no hobbies, no romantic relationships, no career. But they also don't have much choice in their abstract values, such as honesty or productivity. The community forces citizens to behave in accordance with their values, such as neatness, hard work, politeness, and conformity from the time they are old enough to walk. When the citizens are small or very old, caregivers use discipline wands to hit the offender when they have broken a rule, even an unimportant one. There's one disturbing incident described about Asher, the main character's best friend, who is hit so often as a toddler for accidentally using the wrong word that he temporarily stops speaking. When they're adults, minor infractions are managed using social pressure. A loudspeaker reminds people of the relevant rule. More severe infractions lead to a more serious punishment with a judge getting involved. 3 such infractions lead to release, which is actually lethal injection, but which most citizens believe means exile. In other words, citizens in The Giver are given few options and then forced to behave a certain way within those options through the use of both social pressure and physical force. In such a circumstance, there's very little a person can meaningfully choose, so there's very little a person can actually value. As a result, people end up having very shallow emotions. This fact is initially obscured by the importance that seems to be placed on feelings through the telling of the feelings ritual that occurs at dinner each night. But the discussions are always about resolving the feeling as though it's a problem, never acknowledging validity to any negative feeling. Also, the feelings we see discussed are always reactions to the community's values. Lily, Jonas's younger sister, describes feeling anger at other children breaking the rules. The value of conformity has been undermined. Jonas's mother, a judge, feels guilty because someone she disciplined broke the rules again. She is being made to feel responsible for others' actions, which is a natural consequence of being indoctrinated with the importance of others' comfort and, again, of conformity. She doesn't get to choose her own standards of what success looks like for her. Their society treats people like parts of a machine that must function perfectly. And because the machine is perfect, if you don't fit into it, well, something's wrong with you. Similarly, Jonas's father, a caregiver to infants, worries over a newborn who isn't developing quickly enough. Worry over a person you care for is natural, but feeling like a failure about something that's out of your control is not. And Jonas's father is going above and beyond, even breaking rules to help this baby as much as he possibly can. When it's impossible to live up the standards others are trying to hold you to, as it is for both Jonas's parents, guilt or detachment are the natural responses. But Jonas's parents don't have the choice to detach, so they just sit with the guilt. What is agency, and why is it almost impossible in The Giver? The limitations on how people can act in The Giver doesn't only limit their values, it also limits their agency. Agency means making things happen. It's being a causal agent in your environment. It encompasses not only the fact that you have a decision, but how you go about making your decisions. That means both the thinking that goes into a choice and the actions you take to carry it out. Being high agency or practicing agency a lot includes at least 5 elements. 1. Intentionality, setting a purpose and deliberately trying to achieve it. 2. Efficacy, the ability to follow through, which depends on your ability to receive feedback in the form of results and adjust accordingly. 3. Contextualization, understanding how your situation affects what actions you need to take to achieve a given outcome. 4. Independence, the ability to choose and stand by your goals even if others disagree. And 5. Awareness, understanding of the relevant factors. As philosopher Matt Bateman summed it up, being high agency is possessing high intentionality about what to do, high willingness to do it, and a high degree of ability to succeed at it. Agency is something that can be developed. You can practice making decisions and carrying them out. It's a skill as much as it is a trait. But in The Giver, developing these 5 components is nearly impossible for 3 interrelated reasons: coercion, lack of privacy, and lack of knowledge. As mentioned, physical coercion and social pressure are used to control people's actions from the time they're small children until they are released as older adults. Coercion reduces the sense of responsibility people feel for their actions and outcomes. One set of experiments found that coercion increased the perceived interval between action and outcome, relative to a situation where participants freely chose to inflict the same harms. Interestingly, coercion also reduced the neural processing of the outcomes of one's own action. Thus, people who obey orders may subjectively experience their actions as closer to passive movements than fully voluntary actions. In other words, when people are made to do things rather than choosing to do them, they feel more detached. They don't feel like what they did is really something that they did. Not only are they not practicing intentionality, they're necessarily dependent on the people or system making them do the thing in a very important psychological way, because in their minds, that system or those people are bearing the responsibility for their actions. In The Giver, people also lack privacy in significant ways. They are constantly under surveillance. They're expected to share even their dreams and their emotions. And for ordinary citizens, no doors may be locked. But in order to make decisions, we need an element of privacy, at least in our own minds. We need to be able to consider our own knowledge, emotions, and the social ramifications that our actions may have in different contexts. But because the community is so enmeshed and everyone is expected to be so totally transparent at all times, there's only one context everyone is operating in, and it leaves no space for people to develop their own identity. As philosophy professor Maria Brinkner explained, pervasive surveillance and disciplinary structures erode individuality, creativity, innovation, and dissent, and thus overall impede organic and democratic change. They erode the very feeling of responsibility and autonomy because they erode our actual autonomy. That is, our processes of individual and communal self-legislation and self-formation. People are unable to properly contextualize their actions in regards to others because they live in only one tightly constrained context, and they are unable to contextualize their own actions in regards to their own identity because they aren't able to fully develop one. In The Giver, everyone is also totally isolated from other cultures, history, art, and any books besides rulebooks and reference books, and so they all have an extremely limited understanding of the world, and their ability to imagine different choices and their outcomes and thus make decisions is therefore similarly limited. Now, 2 psychologists, Eugenia Gorlin and Vera Bekes, talked about the connection between awareness and agency in the context of therapy, because usually in therapy you're trying to increase a person's agency so they can improve their lives. They wrote, quote, "Agency is increased primarily by increasing the client's awareness of aspects of internal and external reality relevant to living her life. Of course, to increase one's awareness requires the exercise of one's agency, whether that's internally to introspect or realize something they hadn't realized before, or externally, such as seeking therapy or reading books. Gorlin and Bekes argue this agency awareness loop is crucial to achieving the goals of therapy. But in The Giver, people have no means of learning about the past. They have no means of exploring psychology or science or philosophy. They have no means of learning about different lifestyles or systems of government. Their ability to increase their awareness is hamstrung, and as a result, their ability to develop their agency is similarly hindered. Of course, having agency or being high agency in real life doesn't mean you have total control over everything that touches your life. There will always be things outside your control, such as genetic diseases. And increasing your agency isn't about trying to control everything or accepting responsibility for things that absolutely are not your responsibility. But a person with high agency consistently deals with painful situations in a way that still aligns with his or her values, chooses goals and how to achieve them within that context of the things they can't control, acknowledges setbacks or failures, and implements the knowledge they gain from such negative feedback. Psychologist Martin Seligman observed 3 traits that correlated with high agency that also correlate with high self-esteem and other contributors to good mental health. 1. Imagination of hypothetical outcomes. To chart a course for yourself, you need to be able to anticipate the results of certain courses of action. This comes from awareness of your abilities and your context. 2. Belief in efficacy, your ability to do what you need to do to achieve the goal. This is an essential component of self-esteem. And 3. Optimism, or the belief you will achieve desired outcomes and avoid negative ones. But this is not to be confused with simply ignoring risks or failure. Interestingly, Seligman's research found that optimism is correlated with being attentive to feedback. In one study, optimists were more likely to give up on unproductive goals, such as trying to solve an unsolvable puzzle, than people who were not considered to be optimists. All of these traits are actively discouraged in The Giver. Because citizens have such a limited access to knowledge outside their very limited community and no access at all to art, they cannot project outcomes outside of what they see happening all around them. People are assigned a certain kind of life, they live out that life. If they break the rules, they're exiled. That's it. Imagination is not encouraged and thus is not developed. As a simple example, when Jonas is chosen to be the receiver of memory, he's told that it would be painful. But he cannot really imagine that because he has never experienced more pain than that of small day-to-day accidents, like squashing your finger in a door, which is always almost immediately relieved by pain medication. He cannot imagine the pain that comes from grief or war or hunger or anything else because he's never been exposed to even a description of these concepts. Second, citizens' development of efficacy is deeply hindered. Not only do they not get to choose their life path, but the natural effects of any mistakes or errors in judgment they might make are significantly cushioned. If Jonas's father doesn't take proper care of a newborn, for example, he might be chastised, but others are there to help. The facility is under constant surveillance, and he cannot really lose his job unless the breach is so severe as to warrant exile or release. Wisdom comes from accepting and integrating the feedback reality gives you on your decisions. In The Giver, the society is constructed such that barely undistorted feedback gets through. It's all about the society's rules rather than facts of reality. Seligman's third component of agency is optimism. Though everyone in the community seems to trust their government fully and therefore believe that the government will handle situations well, they don't get to choose to mitigate risks or respond to feedback the way that those who develop optimism in a real-world context would. In other words, it's not rational optimism based on the knowledge of their own ability to handle whatever life throws at them. It's blind naivety bred from isolation. Why agency matters to you. Studies show that people who have more agency have overall better mental health. And this makes sense when you consider the virtuous cycle that being high agency sets up. Broadly speaking, when you make things happen in an intentional and reflective manner that aligns with your values, you prove to yourself that you are efficacious and good things can happen for you if you take the necessary steps. So then you're more motivated and set new goals and follow through on them and so on. But when your knowledge and choices are constrained, your agency, which is key to your identity, and thus your emotions, are equally constrained. You're therefore lacking in a core part of the human experience. Obviously, we're not in the situation of The Giver, which actually goes beyond what's even possible in the context of today's science. But it's helpful to look at the novel as an illustration of one extreme, and then recognize that those same constraints can exist in a much less severe form as a result of lack of freedom, abusive relationships, or even limitations created by psychological issues. In all these situations, a person to some extent faces coercion, lack of privacy, and isolation that limits their knowledge. As a result, they struggle in the same way as citizens of The Giver, though likely to a less severe degree. So, recognizing the source of your emotions can help you use them as data points, rather than letting them rule you by being these inexplicable, inescapable tyrants. You have agency, and you can increase your agency by understanding what it's made up of and leveraging that. That's all part of using the agency awareness loop to improve your life and mental health. It's crucial to be aware of the harmful effects of coercion, information deprivation, and lack of privacy if you notice them in your environment. Obviously, if you can change them, which may require changing your environment, then do. But if it's not possible, then just observing the way it could be affecting your thinking, behaviors, and emotions is an act of agency in itself and will increase your clarity. Jonas's journey in The Giver is one of increasing awareness growing side by side with increasing agency as he learns a whole new way of interacting with the world. He learns to ask questions, to experiment, to integrate what he's always known with the new information he's receiving. In the end, he chooses to take a huge risk to change his environment, which wouldn't have been possible for him without the agency he'd been building up throughout the novel. His arc can be a blueprint and an inspiration to anyone who wants to take control of their own life.